Hello, everybody. On behalf of iland and Experis, I'd want to welcome you to today's presentation, Achieving IT Resilience with Cloud-Based Disaster Recovery from Experis and iland. Again, I want to welcome everybody for joining us today. A couple of housekeeping items. We are recording, so if you want to share it later, you'll get a link. If you want to talk to your Experis reps about getting the video, or you'll find it on their social platforms as well. So let's go ahead and start the process, and we'll go through a bunch of different things today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the questions tab on your WebEx thing, and we'll get to questions as we have them, or if not, we can always follow up with you as well. So I want to keep this kind of moving, but also engaging. So if you guys have any question, you want to hear anything more, please feel free to jump in. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to recap some of the backup strategies, and so this is part 2 of a 3-part web series, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to do a little bit of recap, and then if you weren't able to see the first part, tell you how you can go ahead and get that information as well. But we'll talk a little bit about backup strategies, talk about some of the DR challenges that customers are facing, some IT resilience strategies, and then talk about how you can take all of this stuff and leverage cloud-based infrastructure for both the disaster recovery and eventually infrastructure itself. So again, this is being brought to us with help of Experis. So a little bit about Experis. They're a hybrid cloud architecture firm serving large and mid-market enterprises. So you know them. They're your trusted advisors. You can go to them about any questions that you have about private, public, hybrid cloud, hyperconverged, on-prem, off-prem, any sort of hardware, software, professional services, everything like that you need to run your organization, you can reach out to them about. And again, they're bringing us in to have that conversation with you about some of the cloud services that they can offer as well. This is a listing of all of their different technology partners. You can see they leverage a lot of different technologies, enterprise class, industry-leading technologies to help you basically solve your challenges and your problems. And that's kind of what we're really talking about, is how do we solve whatever problem, whatever challenge you have with whatever technology will actually fit. And it's not just pushing something because they have it. It's about solving the issues. So let's talk a little bit about iland. Our motto really is to protect business and to power innovation. And we do that through a whole variety of stuff, but we're really going to talk about disaster recovery as a service and how you can achieve IT resilience leveraging cloud-based solutions. But before we get there, on the last time we had a conversation, and again, if you weren't able to see it or you weren't able to join us, you can look at the Experis social platforms or reach out to your Experis reps and find the information about achieving, disaster data protection with the cloud-based backups and stuff like that. And so really we talked about the 3-2-1 rule of data availability. You want to have 3 copies of your data across 2 different media types, even for local backups, right? So even, if you've got a SAN and you're backing up your virtual machines to that SAN, and then you're taking snapshots on the SAN, if the SAN goes down, all of that data protection philosophy is kind of out the door, right? So it's all about having multiple copies of your data across multiple types of, either hardware, software, media types, whatever. And then the last one is really this cloud-based offsite copy, right? And it's really important to have an air-gapped offsite copy because, there's ransomware out there that will actually, find backup files. There's other things out there that can actually challenge, whatever you're doing locally to be able to do something like that. So that kind of stuff. So let's talk a little bit about that and then kind of move forward to, the complete IT resilience strategy. So iland is really about building a broader data protection solution. Last time we talked about secure cloud backup, and that's that air-gapped offsite backup. Object storage for long-term retention, secure cloud backup for Office 365, just because you're leveraging SaaS-based technologies, you want to make sure that you're also protecting that information as well. And then really the next part of that is around secure disaster recovery with, iland disaster recovery as a service. So we talked about backups. That was the whole process last time. And backups are necessary. You need them for, legal issues. You need them for compliance issues. You need them for data recovery. But it's not enough, right? Backups are not enough by themselves. And true IT resilience really lies in the ability to quickly recover your organization. And I'm going to talk about that and talk about why that's so important and why you can't just have one different, one thing. And it's all about this multi-layered data protection idea. So what does that mean, right? So you start with backups and you move with disaster recovery and you've got all this other stuff. But why do we need all that, right? So, and I don't really have to tell you guys because you guys all know this, but it's pretty bad out there, right? You can't open the news and see anything from ransomware to CryptoLocker to outages for power or accidental users or malicious users, or there's so much going on in the IT world that when stuff goes down, it can actually become a headline, right? Whether it's a hospital unable to take patients, the big one, the 22 Texas towns hit with ransomware, they were out for days on weeks for some of their applications. And when you think about how that affects you and your organization, if you're down for a week, that's not good, right? So you have to understand, that there's a lot of bad stuff out there, and how do you protect it? And that's that multi-layered data protection strategy. And now I love this right here because this is a really, really fantastic statistic, not only because it, obviously aligns with our message, but it really shows you that, 96% of companies with a trusted backup and disaster recovery plan were able to survive ransomware attacks. So we talk about this whole idea about defense in depth and multiple layers of protection with, firewalls and antivirus and anti-malware and, zero trust and, all this stuff to kind of help prevent. But at the same time, stuff still happens, right? Stuff is still going to get through. And so not only do you have the protection part, but you have to have the remediation and recovery part. And remediation and recovery part is what Iland does with our backup as a service, our disaster recovery as a service, all of that stuff to allow you to be able to recover if something happens. And that's a really powerful tool because, if you're locked out of your system or your entire, F drive is locked, what do you do? How do you recover? What are some of the things you need to do? And how quickly you can recover is going to impact, your customers, your internal people, your executives, all that stuff. And so it's very powerful to understand that if you have this multi-layered data protection disaster recovery process in place, you're doing pretty good. You're in the right place. And, you guys know this. Your data is your lifeblood. You need to be protected from all manner of sorts of weird stuff. You've got service availability, whether it's a power outage, whether it's a, double disk fault or, whatever. If you can't get to your data for some reason, it causes an outage. I mean, you may not have a failure or you may not have a CryptoLocker or something like that, but still, if you can't get to it, there's a challenge, there's an issue. Accidental deletion. We hate to say this, but, human errors are probably one of the biggest things other than cybercrime that cause outages. Deleted the wrong virtual machine or configured the VLAN wrong or, who knows, right? But human error can lead to some costly downtime or costly issues. External threats like ransomware, CryptoLocker, those are the ones that get the news on the headlines. But they're out there, right? You can't go a day without seeing that. And then malicious users, insiders, whether this is a really upset employee who has the keys to the kingdom or, something like that, those are still things that, you hate to think about. You hate to think about your admin going in and deleting everything from the last 5 years, but, there's stories out there and it happens. Policy gaps and archival, and when you start thinking about regulatories, if you're in a regulated industry where you have to have data for 7 years, you need to protect it, right? How do you protect that for such a long time? And then you start getting into worrying about do I have the same tape drive as I did from 7 years ago? Can I recover? That's when cloud-based recovery and long-term archival really comes into play. But you have to do that, right? You may be regulated or legally bound to protect this data. And then, again, legal compliance, regulations, audits, all that stuff, right? So all of these things kind of are the reason why you have to do this, the reason why you need to protect your data. And, there's either legal or financial ramifications to all this stuff. And, when you think about what causes a data outage or what happens when you run into any issues, there's a lot of things that can happen, right? A lot of times we talk about, the cost of an outage, right? How much does it cost for downtime? And I think there's a statistic out there that's like, the Gartner says it's like $5,600 an hour or something like that. But then it can go up to, $500,000 depending on your organization. And everybody can do those calculations, right? You can say, all right, if I'm down for an hour, what is that going to mean for my sales? What's it going to mean for lost productivity? What's it going to mean for, my manufacturing plant? Like, those are pretty easy to determine, and to go to your executives and say, hey, look, it's going to cost us, $7,000 a minute for every minute we're down. And that, you can kind of do that, and you can kind of use that as kind of your leverage. But what about the intangible costs, right? So if you think about, in today's society, in today's, environment, like, we're very much a, if you don't have it, I'm going somewhere else, right? It's not necessarily about brand loyalty, but it's more about getting what I need done now, right? Very, very little time to waste. So if your organization is down, what does that do for the perception of the capabilities of your organization? What does it do for your brand loyalty? What does it do for your customers' loyalty? It's so much, they do all these research studies where it's so much easier to keep a customer than it is to regain them once they've left you, right? And then again, the confidence, right? The confidence from your own internal teams, the confidence from your customers, your executive team, whatever, right? Those are all intangible, and you can't really put a dollar sign on them, but that they're very, very important, and they're very scrutinized when something happens, whether it's a power outage, whether it's ransomware, whether it's, a hurricane. Those are all things that not only cause a financial, burden, but an intangible one as well. So it's pretty crazy when you start thinking about that. Now, so we talked the last time about backups, right? And, backups are necessary. You got to be able to do them. You have to do them. You have to do them. Here's why, and here's why, right? But IT resilience and data protection, disaster recovery, all of those things can't just rely on one technology. You can't just rely on backups. And now, why is that? Well, one of the things is the biggest problem with backups, and again, you have to do backups, but when you're thinking about IT resilience and the ability to quickly recover your organization, backups are prone to unacceptable recovery point objectives. And the example I always give is, if you're doing your backups nightly at 7 o'clock at night, and something happens at 6 o'clock the next day, that's 23 hours of data that hasn't been backed up or protected in some fashion, right? So your recovery point is now 23 years old, or 23 hours old, right? Then the second part of this, backups can have painful recovery time objectives. So let's say so your backup normally happens at 7, something happens at 6 o'clock, you're 23 hours out of date from data, right? And then what happens if it takes, 6 hours to recover an entire, virtual environment from tape, right? So now you're 29 hours, out of date. And it starts to become really, really painful, because not only have you been down, for however long it takes to recover and do all that stuff, but that lost data, the 23 hours of data that had been implemented and, put inside whatever system it is you have, that has to be redone, and what does that cost you as far as, people coming in and, finding those emails, or looking at logs, or trying to recover that, or reaching out to customers that you may have lost their orders. Like, that's crazy stuff, right? So, RTOs, RPOs are very, very important when you start thinking about the ability for your organization to keep moving and delivering whatever it is you deliver to your customers. Now, local backups can also be targeted by malicious software. And this is kind of a big thing that's happened pretty recently. But you have these, software, malware, ransomware, crypto lockers, whatever you want to call them, that will go out there and say, okay, not only am I going to lock every single file that I can find on the network, but I'm also going to look for backup files and start deleting your on-disk backups so you can't recover them, right? And, so now you start going to your offsite, and, if your offsite is on a tape in a warehouse, then you got to go get it and bring it back, and, find a tape drive, and, just crazy stuff like that. Even if it's cloud-based, you still have to download all that data to recover. So backup is usually not your first priority or backup restoration is usually not your first thing you want to go to if you get infected by CryptoLocker or something bad happens. And then the other thing is backups need something to restore to. Now, a lot of times in the news, we hear about CryptoLocker, we hear about ransomware, and disaster recovery used to be all about protecting from disasters, natural disasters, hurricanes, fires, floods, all that stuff. And that stuff still happens. I mean, when it's hurricane season and you hear about, data centers under, 8 feet of water, like that's not good stuff, right? And if you are impacted by something, whether it's a flood or a fire or something, even a power outage, like, if the power grid goes down and, the generators don't work or whatever, you can't restore anything to that, right? It doesn't matter that you have your backups in the cloud. It doesn't matter that you got backups on tape. You don't have power, or you don't have physical hardware, or, the thing is damaged or whatever, right? So you need to have something to restore to. And if you don't, that's going to take even longer to recover. If you have a multi-hardware failure issue in a rack, you not only are you, out and you have a downtime and you have an outage and all this stuff, you have to fix all that stuff, which takes time. Then you have to restore all your data. So it's pretty complicated and it can be pretty painful. So that brings us all to this whole idea that IT resiliency means backups and DR. And it really comes down to how you prioritize your workloads, what has priority as far as coming up first, and what business units are impacted, and all that stuff. And those are all conversations you have to have before you even choose a solution. And that's where Experis can really come in and kind of give you their knowledge and help you understand, like, I've got 400 virtual machines, how do I protect them? What's my RTO? What's my RPO? All that stuff like that. But really, IT resilience is all about backups and disaster recovery. So, wow, that's great, Will. It's super easy to talk about, but it's a lot harder to actually implement. And we agree. And that's, one of the reasons why we're here. And this is one of the reasons why we're telling you about all the cool stuff that we can do. But disaster recovery for an entire data center can be complex. It can be costly. It can take a lot of time. As it is, your IT staff is already overworked and they don't have time to do the projects that you want them to do locally, let alone focusing on disaster recovery. Replication, duplication can be costly depending on, are you buying, secondary hardware? Are you doing all this stuff? Testing can be risky if you're not doing it right. Like the last thing you want to have happen is your primary financials in the secondary site coming online and having the same MAC address and IP address, and now you've got conflicts and data's flying all over the place and you don't know where's what. I mean, DR is way easier to talk about than it is to actually implement. Then when you start thinking about it, like, okay, I want to implement disaster recovery. What do? Do I just build it myself? Do I leverage the cloud? And this is pretty ham-fisted, right? I understand that, but it's really about showing you that disaster recovery has changed over the years, and cloud really has kind of accelerated the idea that anybody can do disaster recovery. Because when you think about what you used to have to do, like I've been doing this for forever, you have to have a secondary location and you need power and cooling and racks and servers and storage and networking, cabling, security, connectivity, software, staff. Whew, like it's absurd, right? No wonder most of the time when you start looking at disaster recovery plans, they falter right off the bat because you start looking at it and you're like, I have to buy twice the hardware. I have to worry about maintenance. I have to find another location. I have to worry about the bandwidth between sites. I have to go and configure all this stuff. And my IT team has to learn how to use it. And then they have to configure it. And then they have to test it. And then it just keeps going on and on and on, right? So a little ham-fisted, I know, but really it's why most disaster recovery and IT resilience strategies fail so early on, is because it's complex, it's costly, it's hard to do, it requires a lot, right? So then, of course, you start looking at the cloud, and cloud really has accelerated disaster recovery for customers because you don't have to worry about a secondary site, because the cloud is your secondary site. You can find a geo location that makes sense for you, both from a bandwidth and performance standpoint. You don't have to buy duplicate hardware from what you have on site, right? You don't need to go through the process of saying, okay, well, I've got 25 servers and 5 shelves of SAN, and I got to buy all that, and I got to buy the racks and the equipment and all. You don't have to do that because cloud is all about agile and scalable, and not having you have to worry about the hardware underneath it. And then at Island, we really deliver kind of this concierge onboard and support. And when you think about it, your IT team doesn't have time to do the things they need to do locally, let alone do it on their DR site. And that's where, a cloud service provider can kind of come in and help make this solution a success for you. So, and kind of summing it up, cloud-based disaster recovery makes your job easier. And that's really what we want, right? You want to be able to protect your environment, but you also want to make sure that it eases the ability for you to go back to your auditors, your executives, your boss, your customers, whoever, and say, yep, we're protected, and here's how and here's why. So disaster recovery as a service is really all about cloud-based disaster recovery, right? So you don't have to worry about buying hardware. You don't have to worry about racking and stacking and cabling and all that stuff. By leveraging the cloud and leveraging disaster recovery as a service in the cloud, your IT resources aren't stretched any thinner, right? You don't have to have people go out and spend a week in another data center configuring and cabling and installing software and doing all that stuff. The biggest one is no CapEx, right? No capital expenditure from the beginning of buying, additional hardware. Back in the old days, it was like, okay, well, this hardware is out of warranty, so we're going to move it to the secondary site and we're going to replicate to that. But now all of a sudden you're replicating to something that doesn't have support. And what happens if something goes bad on the secondary site? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So then you started to have to buy secondary site worth of equipment and double the cost. And, now you're planning budgets for 2 sites for 3 years. It just gets crazy, right? It gives you geographic redundancy, but it also gives you geographic boundaries. One of the coolest things about leveraging a global cloud service provider like Iland is now you can say, hey, this data can only be in the United States, or this data, while I'm replicating it, because of GDPR and I'm overseas, and this is my, my Germany data that can only be replicated to another Germany location. All of that stuff starts to allow you to kind of make sure that you abide by whatever those rules and legal issues and, whatever it is that's important to you in that geolocale, whether it's making sure that the data doesn't trespass, or making sure that you have access to it in the case of natural disaster or anything like that. So by leveraging the cloud, you don't have to worry about, oh well, we have a secondary location, but it happens to also be in an earthquake zone, right? Now you have to worry about that. So it just helps you with that. The biggest thing about cloud-based disaster recovery as a service, though, is really about automation, orchestration, and testing, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that throughout the presentation. I'm going to show you some of the stuff we do. But disaster recovery has always had that issue of, I can set it up, I can replicate data, and we're doing okay until I either have to fail over or it's time to test, right? And, it's very easy to test 5 virtual machines in one application. It's very hard to test 150 virtual machines, 17 different tiers of apps, and your entire ecosystem in any sort of fashion that allows you to reliably go to your management and say, yep, we're good if something goes wrong, right? So automation, orchestration, testing that's non-disruptive, that comes in a cloud-based solution, and it really helps you kind of accelerate your disaster recovery adoption, and it helps you solve that problem. And in fact, when you start looking at like Gartner quotes, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, self-service disaster recovery supports greater control by end users over server image replication, failover, and failback procedures, right? So the idea that, you can go to the Iland Secure Cloud Console, you can create a run book, you can create IT resources, you can fail it over, you can test it, you can bring the virtual machines online, you can establish the VPNs and the links and the networking and all that stuff from within the same console. And I'm going to show you screenshots of that. But the ability to do that from your desk and then run a test and then come back and say, yep, here's our report, everything was successful, or maybe not, and these are the things that failed, and here's what we're going to fix, is a huge change to disaster recovery traditional methods, and allows almost anybody to be able to do this. At Iland, you have access to expert support with deep recovery expertise. I'm going to talk about this later, but we've been doing this for a very long time. We've got engineers who not only can help you with all of the technologies, because that's part of it, but also understanding just best practices, like what's an industry best practice for Active Directory? What should I do with this Exchange server? How do I manage these, 5 different dependent application stacks, and on when it comes to booting them up in the proper order, or how do I migrate my VLAN configuration? Like all that stuff is stuff that our guys deal with every single day. And when you start thinking about, again, the challenges of what an IT person has to do with on a daily basis and what they are worrying about on a daily basis, this allows you to really focus on what you need to do and leverage the expertise from us, because we've been doing this for forever. Now, once you start thinking about cloud-based disaster recovery and all this stuff, one of the biggest challenges is you don't want to lose visibility or management of your solution. And so that's what we're talking about here is the Iland Secure Cloud Console gives you a unified management platform to manage all of your cloud-based services. Disaster recovery, in the last episode, we talked about backups, being able to see the backups from within the console. But disaster recovery and running your applications and running your actual infrastructure is very important, because you don't have control of this anymore. From a I can't walk up and plug in a KVM or boot it up or turn it on or anything like that with a power button. You're leveraging the cloud, so you need to have the same level of coordination and automation and manageability that you have on site, but now with your cloud-based solution. And so when we start talking about, this is a picture of the Iland Secure Cloud Console, and I've got a bunch of screenshots that I'm going to show you as well. But when you start talking about IT continuity and IT resilience, again, the idea is that if something bad happens, you don't want to have to worry about, okay, well, how long is it going to take for me to get, the parts fixed and then recover from a backup and then bring the server back online, or whatever it is that's affecting your local environment. You want to know that within minutes of an outage, I can press a button and either bring some or all of my infrastructure online in the cloud and continue running my business, and then take a look at what happened. This server was crypto locked, or, the SAN went down because of a power issue or anything like that. Get your organization up and running first, then go fix whatever's going on, because now the pressure's not there to worry, where is it up? Is it up? Is it up? All that stuff. So what we do is we kind of build this whole idea of IT continuity within our Secure Cloud Console. And we have a couple of different phrases that I'm probably going to use a couple times, and I just want you to understand. So we have this idea of a recovery group. Now, a recovery group is basically just a bunch of IT assets and dependencies that are grouped together and replicated, right? So this could be your Active Directory DNS, primary, functionality, tier 1 stuff, or it could be an application server with the SQL server and the web part and 5 different databases and storage, or file share, all in one sort of thing. Whatever the dependencies are and how you prioritize workloads and all that stuff, that's kind of a recovery group. And then after that, you have this idea of a runbook, and a runbook is all about automating the recovery plan. So like I said before, it's very easy to boot up, 10 virtual machines and wait for each one to power up and say, okay, services have started, let's boot up the next one. But when you have 150 servers and you've got, 17 different tier 1 applications that all have different dependencies and different times that they have to be powered on and all that stuff, like the last thing you want to be doing during an outage or a disaster is dealing that with yourself, right? So you want to make sure that you can automate it, and then you want to be able to make sure that you can test it, right? So within the console, you can create any number of recovery groups. You could have a tier 1 apps failover, or just AD, or all of the whole organization in one button sort of thing. So it allows you to create multiple different run groups and understand what you're trying to accomplish. And then from there, you can actually test it and report on it. And that's very important too, because you want to be able to say, you've done all this work, and here's the report to my boss or my boss's boss that says, yep, or even an auditor, hey, yeah, we ran a test at, 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, and it took 18 minutes to recover our tier 1 applications. And so those are up and running. It took another 40 minutes to run our tier 3, and we didn't fail over this, and this because we didn't need them at the time. Here's our success rate. Here's where we're at. Here's how quickly we were able to accomplish this. All of that automation and reporting is very vital for you to be able to prove that you're okay when something actually bad does happen. So here's the Iland Secure Cloud Console. I'm going to show you guys a bunch of pictures. Mainly, this is not only for the recording's sake, but also so you can understand that the visibility and functionality you have from the Iland console is pretty powerful, and it allows you to do a lot of these things. So, this is the continuity pane. You have the full orchestration and automation with the disaster recovery runbooks. You can automate the failover plans. Over on the left, you see all the different data centers. And, we've got way more videos of this stuff online, so you can actually see some more detailed stuff. So way more than we can get into here in the 45, 50 minutes that we have for you. But over on the left, you can see all the different virtual applications, the data centers, your NSX gateways, all of that stuff, because that's all very important. I mean, one of the biggest challenges a lot of people have from disaster recovery is not only just getting the data to the other side, because that's pretty easy nowadays with most software and most solutions, but what about your networking, right? So you've got, 18 different VLANs, and different virtual machines have to have different connections to different VLANs, and how do you get that replicated to the cloud, and how do you make sure that when you do fail over, all of the virtual machines that need to talk to each other can, and the ones that can't don't, right? So you need to make sure that you can manage all that, and you can do it all from within the console. Within the console, you can also see real-time and historical RPOs for replication to verify that you're getting what you need, right? So if you have, a tiny bandwidth pipe and you're going to Australia from New York, and your business organization says, I need to have an RPO of 4 minutes, and it takes 32 minutes just to replicate a 5-minute chunk, obviously you're not going to meet those needs. So being able to see both real-time and historical what the RPOs are for your replication is really, really important, because it allows for you to either level set the business organization on, what the time is for recovery, or the RPOs and RTOs and all that stuff, or make changes so that you can get better ones as needed, whether it's bandwidth upgrade, whether it's, different location, whether it's smaller chunk size, like all that stuff. Creating a disaster recovery runbook is all based on wizards. So you can go in and you can say, okay, I'm going to create a recovery runbook on, my tier 1, my tier 2, my tier 3, or everything, or just AD, or whatever it is. So you can do partial failovers, you can do full failovers, all that stuff, and you just do it by creating a recovery runbook. And then you can have multiple of them, and then that helps you take your recovery groups, which are your IT assets that are grouped, and allow you to power them on in the right order and do all that fun stuff. A little bit more on the failover wizard, understanding, how long it's going to come over, when it's going to come over, because most of the technologies have multiple points in time for replication. It's not a completely synchronous mirrored technology, right? That's sometimes you don't want synchronous mirrored technology when it comes to disaster recovery, because if you have CryptoLocker on one side and you replicate CryptoLocker to the other side, well, now you have 2 sites that are locked and you're not in a good spot, right? So understanding that you have multiple points and times and how you can leverage those, you can do it all from the wizard as well. And then, once you do this, whether you're doing a test or a failover or whatever, having the report is key, right? Being able to come back and say, okay, these are the virtual machines that failed over. Here's my screenshot of the Windows not Windows XP, oh my goodness, like Windows 10 logo that says I'm getting ready to log in. What happened, as far as the virtual machines powering on? Was there any issues? And what's really good about this, not just that you can come to your auditors and to your boss and say, hey, look, this is all working. But what's even better is if something doesn't work, you can say, oh, I forgot to replicate this dependency, or oh, we forgot to change this VNIC, or whatever. That allows you to say, I always jokingly say, back in the old days, you'd have to tear down everything over a weekend and try to fail over, and it would fail miserably. Now you can, before lunch on a Wednesday, you just press a button, you go to lunch, you come back, and it's like, oh, 74 out of 77 virtual machines were successful. You find out why the 3 weren't, and then you run it again, and then you get a report and says, hey, everything works great. So very, very powerful tools by leveraging some of the cloud-based solutions, and reporting is one of the big things. Built-in NSX networking is huge. When you start thinking about what you're leveraging on site as far as software-defined networking and NSX stacks and all that stuff like that, the last thing you want to do is have all of that skill set and understanding and knowledge just go away when you start moving to the cloud because they use something different or they're doing something, whatever. So by creating NSX gateways and edges and all the stuff like that within your cloud-based DR site, you know that using the same firewall rules, the same natting, the same VLANs, all that stuff. When you fail over, those virtual machines are going to power up. They're going to connect to the right VLANs. They're going to continue working just like they are. If you're doing a partial failover, you're going to have a VPN between the two sites so that the IP addresses don't even have to change. All that stuff is kind of just built into the way the software and the failover stuff works nowadays, which makes it so much easier than it used to be. Once you're actually running in the cloud, right? So, the idea being that there's a disaster, there's an outage, whatever, I need to run into the cloud. You don't want to lose management and functionality that you have on site with your cloud-based infrastructure. So now all of a sudden, you don't have access to Virtual Center client, you don't have access to, to the normal tools that you have. So within the Iland Secure Cloud Console, we give you access to all of the same features and tools that you're used to, right? So you can open the console, you can power on a virtual machine, you can manage the snapshots, you can see all of the performance, both real-time and historical. Over on the left here, you can see all the different virtual machines and your gateways, and you can change, CPU size and add memory and all of the stuff that you normally do on site, whether it's in Virtual Center or Power CLI or PowerShell or anything like that, you can do from within the Iland Secure Cloud Console once the environment is up and running in the cloud. And then one of the cool things is, as soon as virtual machines are failed over, they're added to an air-gapped backup protection scheme. So, the last thing you want to do, right, is you're running backups on site and you're protecting all this information, and then you fail over the cloud and you're running for 2 days and then something bad happens, right? Now you don't have a backup. Like, where do you go from there? So as soon as virtual machines are brought online in a disaster recovery environment, they're automatically added to the air-gapped backups. And one of the cool things about that is these backups are not deletable by customer admins, right? So if there was a malicious user, if there was some problem, they couldn't go in, delete the virtual machine from the cloud, and then delete all the backups, right? The backups are stored in a different location, unaccessible to anybody but to support. You can recover, but you can't delete, right? So very powerful tools for that last gasp of, protecting everything that you possibly have. And then in addition to that, the Iland Secure Cloud Console has a huge myriad set of security tools and automation tools and all of this stuff, because again, you're moving from your stuff on site, you're moving to the cloud, and the last thing you want to have to worry about is, well, I don't have antivirus, I don't have anti-malware, I don't have my firewalls, I don't have web reputation, I don't have integrity checks, I don't have vulnerability scanning. But now you do, right? So once the virtual machines are brought online, they're automatically added to these resource pools. They're being scanned for antivirus and malware and web reputation and application monitoring and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about that, right? So you're not having to design a DR site that also has all of the security features that you normally run in another location. Once they come online, they're all part of it, and you're good to go. And then, full visibility, again, is very, very important. So that means everything from how is my VM performing to how much is it going to cost me, right? I mean, the good thing about cloud-based resources is it's truly a pay-as-you-need situation. And so no longer are you worrying about buying double the hardware for your, 3-year budget concerns. But what you also want to make sure is that you don't spiral out of control by not having visibility into how your applications are working once they're brought online. And so by having full visibility into billing, utilization, all of that stuff, you can know how much is a DR event going to cost me, how much does it cost me if I run for a day, if I run for a month. All that stuff is very transparent and very visible for you. Then, the next part about this, right, is everyone's like, great, all right, okay, so I buy into this disaster recovery as a service. I buy into using the cloud. I'm good with all that. And then the question is, well, how much do I need? Well, the cool thing is we have this tool called Iland Catalyst. And what it is, it's a free tool that allows you to right-size your environment for whatever you're doing, whether you're doing backups like we talked about last time, whether you're doing disaster recovery or eventually infrastructure. What it does is it scans your environment. It tells you, if you want to create, a recovery group with these 7 dependencies, here's how much space you're going to use. Here's what your average CPU utilization is. And, one of the cool things about cloud-based resources, or at least at Iland, is it truly is a pay-as-you-use. So if you have a virtual machine that's got, 10 CPU and, a whole bunch of stuff like that, but when it really powers on, it's only using like 4% of that. we're not going to charge you for 10 CPUs. We're going to charge you for the 4% that you're utilizing, right? So it's very powerful when you come to thinking about the cost of disaster recovery nowadays versus, forever ago. But with the Island Catalyst, you can actually run speed tests to different locations, so you can see the bandwidth. You can see, can I even replicate my data in the time that I need to meet my recovery needs, right? So Island Catalyst kind of answers all those questions about how much, how fast, where, what's it going to cost, like all that stuff. And then cloud-based disaster recovery leads to cloud-based infrastructure. So, we're going to talk about this on the next time. But when you start thinking about running, so at Iland, we don't have like a DR pod and an infrastructure pod and a backup pod. We have enterprise class software and enterprise class hardware that runs everything. So when you're bringing your disaster recovery online in the cloud, you're not dealing with like super slow disks and, 5th generation old, archaic machines that are sitting on a rack that are barely hanging on for dear life. Like, you're talking about running a production environment, because when you have a disaster and you have to fail over, that is your production environment now, right? And then it brings to call all of the information and all the things about running in the cloud. How do I remove myself from the hardware stack and really focus on the business value of IT innovation, my applications and stuff like that. But like I said, that's another discussion for next time. And in fact, if you want, join us on December 5th as we discuss accelerating and simplifying IT with cloud-based infrastructure from Experis and Iland. You'll get an email with the information on a landing page for all that stuff. So really cool. Again, part of that'll be the third part of our 3-part discussion. So at Iland, our focus is your success. Whether you're just doing backup, doing disaster recovery, fully hosted solutions, our job is really to just make you successful, make it easy to adopt cloud-based solutions, make it easy to have the best possible customer experience that you can have, and help you really understand what you need and how you're going to get there and what are you going to do. Now, again, we've been doing this for a very long time, right? So we've been delivering IT services for over 25 years. Over 11 of them have been dedicated to disaster recovery alone. We've got all kinds of certifications and attestations from a compliance and legal perspective. We even have a compliance team on site. So if you have questions about GDPR, or you have questions about HIPAA or SOX or any of that stuff, we have entire teams dedicated to helping you understand how that certification and attestation from a compliance perspective impacts you once you start moving to the cloud. And then one of the big things is, Gartner's been doing a Magic Quadrant for, disaster recovery as a service in the cloud, and they've been doing it for 4 years. And we've actually been the leader in this space for the last 4 years. So, and that's everything from the console that I showed you to the support to the understanding of, what are best practices. I mean, when you think about when you as an organization are trying to implement disaster recovery, you're doing it one time for yourself. But when you leverage the expertise of a cloud-based provider like Iland, we've been doing this for many people for a very, very long time. So it's very easy to go in and say, oh, you forgot to think about this, or hey, you need to do this, or hey, don't forget to do this, and this, and then bring it all over. So we can help you with all that. And then a whole bunch of other awards that we've won across the years that I'm not going to go through, but you can tell that we've been doing this for a very long time. And to not only have we been doing this for a very long time and we won all these awards and stuff like that, but the most important part is our customers award us as well. And, when you talk about, huge support satisfaction, and our net promoter score is huge, and, 100% financially backed guarantee for SLAs, like, and even one of our customers using a quote, being able to deliver a solution for them that was able to meet their needs across the board. Like, we've been doing this for a very long time, and we want to help you make that transition to disaster recovery. We want to make sure that your IT resilience strategy doesn't just die on the vine. We want to help you get to that point where if something happens, you've already done the protection, and the protection hopefully catches almost all of it. But if something happens, then you have the recovery and resilience needed to be able to continue to run your organization. So with that, let's go ahead and open it for questions and answers. I'm going to go ahead and look through some of these questions that have come in. Again, please, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the questions tab. If you don't want me to say it out loud, go ahead and just say, reply to me privately or something like that, and I can do that as well. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. So actually, one of the things that just came up was, well, how do I even begin, right? And so that's a long conversation, but really, we have a couple of different things. So, the first thing I talked about earlier was that Catalyst tool that can help you just gauge what resources you have, understand what relationships you have, dependencies you have, and how much stuff you have. Because a lot of times, you've got virtual machine bloat and you've got all this stuff going on. Running Catalyst can help show you, hey, really you only need to protect 2/3 of this, or a bunch of this stuff has never been powered on in 6 months or whatever. So the first part about that is understanding your environment, and then the second part is just having a conversation with us about the networking stack and prioritization of workloads and all this stuff. And even going further, you can actually sign up for you talk to your Experis reps. We can go through and sign up for proof of concepts or trials or any of that stuff through them, and they can help you answer those questions like, well, what do I protect? How do I protect it? What's important to me? Because honestly, that relationship that they have with you is going to be the one that allows you to understand, what they understand your business, they understand your environment, and they can help you decide what you need to do for that. So it was kind of a long answer to where do I begin, but that's really what it is. And there's a whole bunch of information, like I said, on our YouTube channel and our site, as far as everything from how does it work, what buttons do you push, all the way up to the business value of how do I begin to have a conversation with my business stakeholders and say, hey, look, like if I have 500 virtual machines and I have to fail them all over, like somebody's is not coming up first. And how do you have that conversation? How do you prioritize? And then how do you test and prove to each of the different business owners that their environment is protected and available to come online? So, okay, so that one's private. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, like I said, we'll hang out for a couple more minutes. If not, I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to come check this out with iland and Experis. Reach out to your Experis reps for any sort of information around disaster recovery as a service, or the previous webinar that we did around data protection and backup strategies. And then again, join us December 5th as we talk about infrastructure as a service. And Experis can help you solve all these challenges, right? I mean, these are challenges that, are affecting every organization everywhere, whether it's cloud first, cloud-based, IT resilient, whatever buzzword you want to use. The reality of it is, every organization is faced with the same stuff, the same challenges, the same burdens, and Experis and Iland can help you kind of solve some of those. So, yeah, so no new questions have come in. Either that means I did a fantastic job, or nobody has any questions about this. So again, I appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to come hang out with us. We will have the recordings when it's done, and we will share that information out with you as well. And we look forward to seeing you on the next presentation around infrastructure as a service. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we shall talk to you guys soon. Thank you.